What up? Everything can be described in at least two ways. Everything can be described and seen and experienced in at least two ways. Sit with that for a second. What you talking about, Billy? What are you talking about, Billy? I'll say it again. It's pretty straightforward. Everything can be seen in at least two ways, can be described in at least two ways. On this channel, I do a show called LED, the League of Extraordinary Discourse. And I actually did an episode where one of the things we talked about was the idea that my truth is separate from your truth. And we had a discussion with two guests, and it was pretty interesting. And this whole concept of truth is a very interesting one. We talk on this show about perception, we talk about identity, we talk about linguistics. And the idea of the title, again, everything can be seen and described in at least two ways. Um, it's just true. It speaks to the fact that we are all have a localized mind, localized tools of perception that give us our own perspective separate from everyone else. So that multiple people can be at a concert and watch the same performance, listen to the same music, have the same experience essentially, and come away with multiple different feelings, right? Because they are sensing it different, they are hearing and seeing things differently. And beyond that, they came to the concert with a different set of conditions, a different set of definitions and ideas, goals, moods, intentions, the whole nine. Everything can be seen in at least two ways. I mean, it's obvious, right? So let's take one of the most sort of one of the most difficult topics that people go split down 50-50 with. We'll take abortion. Okay. I stand firmly in the freedom of choice category. I stand firmly for women's right to choose on this, by the way. But the question of abortion and whether or not it should be a legal procedure, that debate hinges on the definitions and the priorities of the people involved in that conversation. It hinges on the language you're using at every step of the way. That's why there's a discussion. The debate rages about whether we're talking about a zygote or a baby, or when life begins. Is it at conception or at birth? And the priorities of the living mother versus this potential life. Everything can be seen in multiple ways. And it's seen even more as the technologies we enjoy now, these kinds of technologies that allow us to see babies, to see the growing embryo and the baby, developing in the mother's womb. We can see that at an earlier and earlier stage. We can see fingers, we can see movement, we can start to detect things, signs of life at earlier stages. And this evolves and changes the argument. And we're having a different argument today than we were several years ago. Knowing, of course, that the entire argument is a political argument, and it's an effort to, it's a political argument to create political strife. That's the first thing to mention. But beyond that, when you get into that conversation, it can be seen in two ways. You are simply choosing. You are choosing to see a certain way. You are choosing a set of definitions. You are choosing a set of priorities. You will speak that way. You likely have a peer group, friends, family that are also speaking that way. Okay. Everything can be seen in at least two ways. One of the biggest and most absurd examples of this right now is the genocide happening in Gaza, the ongoing violence in Lebanon, Iran. You watch you watch all these videos on social media, you see children getting blown up. Now we're going into our third year of this genocide, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, all the incursions in the West Bank, the settlers, the terrorism from Israel. And there are groups of people, Zionists, who insist that this is not just okay, but that this is good. They want to tell you that this is a good thing. This is our ally. This is the United States ally doing a good thing, and we have to support this thing. The reports, you can see the reports come out. It says an 83% civilian casualty rate in Gaza. They will tell you that first, if they're not able to dispute the numbers, which they aren't, but they might try that. Um, even if they don't dispute the numbers, they'll tell you, it's a thing. It's what has to happen. Oh, they create a mythology that makes it work. They simply label people. They label innocent children and mothers and fathers as well. We sometimes just exclude the father because we want to, talk about the sympathetic air of the mother. But like these men who are just, living in that part of the world, and you simply come up with a rationale and you tell the story. You blowing up hospitals. This is against international law. But they will tell you, no, there's terrorists there, and there's people underground, and there's tunnels, and this justifies blowing up entire buildings. This is obviously against all of the human rights conventions and international laws that we have. And yet people will make that argument. Not only will people make that argument, but others will nod their heads like, ooh, 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 and take it and accept this. Now, what I'm pointing to here really, and particularly with the Zionist stuff, we're looking at Hasbaris, we're looking at intentional people who use language to split reality, who use language to intentionally create the other way of seeing this obviously wrong thing, this thing that is obviously wrong. And they're so clever about it that at the same time, we'll talk about the Holocaust and we'll talk about human rights. We'll talk about never again. In one condition, we are certain about the sanctity of every life. And in another condition, you can spin it and say that certain lives don't matter because language allows you to do that. You can do that with intention. One of the really interesting and creative things here, when I think about it, is you ever look at like a James Bond movie, right? 007 James Bond, and you're watching this movie and they're chasing on a motorcycle and they run through a cafe and poof, and just like blow up a whole cafe, and then they steal a car, and then all these car accidents happen, and then they run into a gas station and the gas station explodes, and then there's another accident and they shoot a couple of people, and at the end of it, this whole amazing scene, at least 30 people died. At least 30 people died. Innocent people. They were in France somewhere that, people are just getting killed for no reason. And at the end of the scene, though, James Bond stands up. There's fire and smoke everywhere. He stands up and the camera's behind him and he kind of rises up. And the implication is it's all good. James Bond is the good guy. He was doing the good thing. He was all that stuff that happened, even the unfortunate stuff. It was in the pursuit of James Bond's best effort, and he's a good guy. And that's how you can always, and that's particularly what the Hasbarists do. You can always take any condition. You can take the horrific story of Hind Rajab, and you can just pull out and say and call who they want, the IDF. You can call them the good guys, and then make that claim. And not only can you make the claim, but several other people will nod their heads in agreement and just take that. And what I want to point with, I pick abortion and I pick genocide because these are two stark issues. I mean, these are things that people get riled up over, and they're stark issues. The second one in particular to me is super easy. Well, they're both easy to me, but the second one in particular is super easy. And I want to come back to this again because everything can be seen in at least two ways. So as I've talked about on this show several times about the news media, the what they're supposed to be doing is they're supposed to be using accurate language to help us understand the world. But what they actually do is they actually control this variance here. We're pointing to a truth about reality. We're pointing to a truth about language. Language are symbols. They are agreed upon symbols. They aren't the thing. And so when you watch CNN, they're not allowed to call it a genocide. They will call it a war. They will call it a conflict. They're not allowed to state that Israel has committed these crimes. And so in the headlines, you'll hear, a child was killed or that 14 children were killed. You won't hear who committed that. And the purpose of that, of course, is to control the way that people see to control the way that people can perceive and understand the events in the world. It is to lock in a reality. There is a truth about our reality that everything can be seen, perceived, experienced, and described in at least two ways. And the purpose of the corporate news media is to lock in their preferred version, their preferred reality, to ensure that all of the language lines up to avoid ever properly seeing things in a way other than the way you're supposed to see it. You know, um, this is just all the time. This is just all the time. Everything can be seen in at least two ways. There's a lot I want to say about this today. I'm just going to really start on this. I'm not going to get into the depth of it, but I'm going to come back to this probably tomorrow again. But I want to say the reason it's important to point to this, the reason I'm doing this, and I might do a series just on this, is first off, you have to break the hold that stories have in your head. We have stories, we experience something, and we tell ourselves that it is or it was. We have traumas or things that we remember, and we tell ourselves that it is or it was, and we believe that it's locked. We believe that it's locked. We haven't been given the awareness about our incredible, it's a truth and it's a power. It's what is, that you have the ability in this moment to apply the language that empowers you to see the thing in a way that empowers you, whatever it is. There's something positive, something negative, something in between. Again, those other topics are big ones. I'm talking about everything. You know, you walk past someone, is that person fat? Is it hot? Is it cold? Am I wrong? Do I need to fix? Am I late? Am I behind? Powerfully, we do this without the intention. See, the key is the intention. And again, like, there are people who walk around very aggressively in the world, and they tell a story that justifies it. They tell a story that justifies it. Maybe they are a physically domineering physical presence. Maybe they just have a gruff voice. Maybe they've had success with it. Maybe people tend to back down when they step up, when they buck up. So they are encouraged to keep going that way. And then there are other people who have the exact opposite condition, right? Who they kind of present very non-threatening. Um, they couldn't imagine being aggressive in that same way. They couldn't imagine it for themselves. They couldn't tell us. They couldn't see themselves in that condition, even though it's fully available to them. The question of, like, what does it mean to be a good person? They might define it in such a way that says that they need to be demure and humble and quiet. The other person still thinks he's a good person. That other person, the aggressive person, can still define the thing in such a way that he's still a good person while he's also being an aggressor and using people, let's say. So the intentions is key, and you get to tell a story, and we have to be able to break the hold that these stories have on us, the stories that we tell ourselves. And if you're someone watching news of any kind, particularly corporate news, you're being fed a bunch of stories about the world. And it's important to be able to know that those stories are stories. Those aren't the thing. That the things that they're describing in those stories can be seen in at least one other way, but probably several other ways. That there's, at every turn, the humans at play telling you those stories are choosing words with intention. They're thinking about their employer. They're thinking about their partnerships. They're thinking about conventions and conventions of speech, and they want to lock in the favorable reality. So you have to break these stories. These stories don't matter. As a black man, just say quickly, man, the way, we suffer from um, stories. We suffer from stories that are perpetrated and spread. The New York Times, CNN, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, mean, it doesn't stop. The number of guys, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world now, the first trillionaire supposedly, he loves to get on Twitter and assert how important whiteness is, and how Matt Walsh wants to tell you that black men are violent, and poor fathers and all this stuff. And they can drum up the story. They can garner the data to do that. They go to you know wherever they need to go, and the FBI has statistics on violence. They can do that. And of course, the FBI also has statistics on rape in America. And if you look at sexual assault and rape, you'll see that white men are over and beyond the perpetrators. 73% of violent sexual assault and rape are perpetrated by white men. Yet that story is not told because our news media is not interested in that story. Singling out white men and making broad statements about white men doesn't help their bottom line in the same way. The white men who watch might not want to hear that. They'll be titillated and excited to hear about the stories about black male dysfunction and black family dysfunction. They want to take that story and magnify it and talk about it in all its parts, but their own failings are not part of the story because they don't care about you. They have their own goals. And this world that we're seeing, when we look out in the world, what is the problem? They will tell the story about what the problem is. They will say it in their way. And that's why you have to take power and say it your way. So again, the first reason this is important is because you have to break the hold that stories have in your mind, in your perception, the stories that you've created and the stories you've been given, the stories you've received, the stories you've held, stories you've internalized. There are millions and millions of them, and they're driving quietly. They are governing the limits of your understanding, governing the limits of where you look and how you move, and what produces anger and fear and what produces anxiety. And so, yeah, break the stories. And the second thing is to know that you have the same superpower as the New York Times. You have the same superpower as CNN. Earlier, I talked about the Hasbarists. You have the same superpower to organize language, to tell a story that puts you in a position to be empowered and to be active, to realize that you don't have to be passive with narratives. You are not just a passive recipient of narratives, to understand that other people are active participants in the narrative game. You will hear stories about white excellence and white intelligence and Ashkenazi brilliance and contributions, and you will hear downplaying of black contributions. You will hear these kinds of stories, and they are just that. They're just stories, and you have the same power. You have the same power to know that the best story is possible for you, that you can imagine the best story and assume it and take it, and it's yours. You don't have to wait for anybody. You don't have to ask for permission. And if you don't grab a hold of your story, you'll be swimming in somebody else's story. And everything can be seen in at least two ways. I guess the third and last thing is that, yeah, once you pull these stories down, you realize that a lot of stuff requires more for, like, it produces a calm. A lot of stuff you might experience, it requires more information before you can be angry or be upset. You know, um, it just produces a calm because you realize that things are, and they are for reasons beyond our explanation. beyond our understanding at the moment. And that first story, if you want to demonize something or hate something, that you're probably hmm, you're probably off, including with yourself, especially with yourself. If you have some sort of inner disdain, kind of, if you feel a wanting and you feel incomplete, you feel not good enough, that you don't have to hold to that. You don't. If you want to get deeper into understanding what that means and how you can actually pull yourself into an even more empowered position through the story, not necessarily through doing anything, not necessarily through the typical actions that we assume, but through grasping a different approach and telling a different story, using different language, telling a wider story that empowers you. Check out the other videos on the channel. They all correlate pretty nicely. And I'll be on tomorrow. Thanks for checking me out. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Holla, holla, holla. Peace.